Welcome to the Well Prepared Life podcast, where we dive into the fundamentals of readiness for life's challenges, covering topics from personal responsibility to mental and physical preparedness and beyond. Let's forge resilience, nurture growth, and embrace responsibility on the journey to the well-prepared life. Hey, welcome to the Well Prepared Life podcast, where we talk about forging resilience and nurturing growth and embracing responsibility together. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Kyle. And we've been talking a lot about different concepts, different thoughts about resiliency and being prepared for challenges in life and how to be stronger people as a result. And so thought came to me is like, how have I shown resiliency in my life, and how does it show up in a day-to-day life? So one example was we're traveling, we're trying to catch a train to get to a place on time, and I did not plan on getting on the wrong train. I was planning on being late to the train, and I knew the exact next schedule for the next train, but I instead hopped on the wrong train. So didn't really have a good plan for that. And I was just thinking, okay, how do I show resiliency? I need to identify some different risks associated with certain activities. So Nathan, what are your thoughts on the real life application of resiliency and how that might show up in life like that? What could I have done better, maybe?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing that shows resilience is like you didn't fall apart when you hit the wrong train.
Okay, yeah.
So that's a mental resiliency right there, like we've talked about before already, where it's like when something went wrong, you weren't just like devastated or like scared or freaked out. You're like, this is unfortunate.
Right.
But we're going to figure out the next step. And I don't know all of your emotions. I don't know
felt a lot of that.
So if you were stressed or because
you
were in a foreign country when this happened, right?
Right,
Yeah. So
right,
that adds a whole nother layer of stress over the top of this, where it's not just like, oh, hey, like I got on a wrong train. It's, oh, hey, I got on a wrong train where I'd like struggle to understand everybody around me.
Right.
I can't just easily ask for directions.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Different languages.
Like I've lived in South Korea for like 4.5 years, and when I was younger, and definitely understand that as far as like there's definitely a different level of getting lost in a foreign country over getting lost somewhere in the States, where you can just be like, hey, where do I go?
Yeah.
Thankfully, being English being the primary language of the world, most people can speak a little bit of it if you do need help, but
you can help struggle, say airport, or, figure out the right word for that. But
so that's like the first step as far as how do we respond when something bad happens. But then with that idea of like being resilient and being ready for things that could go wrong, I think there's that's another step as far as like preparing to be resilient.
Right. Okay.
As far as like planning ahead and doing that. And it sounded like you did partially, but you didn't do like the full picture.
Right. I kind of expected, maybe missing a train. Okay, next one comes in 12 minutes. I kind of expected that, but I didn't expect, this also might go to the direction. Let's just hop on that and see. That's not the right time to just give it a chance. You got to do a little bit more prep work. Yeah. So I realized that after the fact, I probably should have planned out other trains that might get me to my destination.
Yeah. So there's like kind of two routes of thinking with this. One is planning things of like having like primary plans, alternate plans, contingency plans, and like emergency plans. And that's a military term called PACE, which if you've ever heard about that, PACE, it's literally like primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And if you are an extreme personality, I don't know that I know anybody that actually lives this out. I know people that talk like they live it out, but don't actually. But like if you actually like live this out in every area, that's a lot of work and very stressful.
Yeah.
So that's like where it's like, okay, there are probably some areas where you should think about things like that. But like hop on a train, you're a few minutes late. It's like, it's not the end of the world. And that's like leads to the other element of like preparing things as far as your likelihood of something happening versus the impact of something happening.
Right.
So that's where it's like you're like hopping on the wrong train. When you're in a different country, you don't understand the language. The signs are probably a little bit hard to read. You aren't familiar with the surroundings.
Right.
Like your assessment was maybe a little bit off, but the likelihood of getting on the wrong thing or going in the wrong direction is decently high. Like it's at least at a moderate, medium area.
More than low.
It's not like a no chance.
Right.
It's at least a medium chance, but the impact of that is pretty low. Like in most situations, sure, it could be really bad, but the most likely impact of it is you have to hop on another train going back, get back. You're just late.
Right.
Like that's the impact in most situations. And that's what happened, right? You were just late.
Exactly. Yep.
So the impact of that relatively low, but the likelihood was like decent.
Right. That's
and
fair.
so you could like look at that and be like, okay, how likely is this to happen? What's the impact? And you could be like, well, it's kind of likely to happen, but we'll figure it out if it happens. Like
Yeah.
that's a way of planning for something.
Okay.
Where you can
kinda
even
address
just
it as it comes.
you can just even decide, you know what, this isn't worth my mental time now beforehand. I'll just figure it out if we run into that situation.
Yeah.
Or you could say, you know what, I don't want to deal with that, and then you like take the time earlier on to actually address that issue in
Right.
more depth beforehand, so that if that were to happen, then you can then go to the right spot and like be like, oh, I know exactly what to do if I hopped on the wrong train.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And the funny thing is when you plan more thoroughly, and this is like not in necessarily saying you always have to plan thoroughly. I tend to be on the planning side of things, but I don't think there's anything wrong with being more spontaneous, especially when like the consequences are low.
I don't know. My wife and I found this out. My wife and I are very different. She's
Yeah.
more of a planner, like likes it all down to the minute, so that way she can go,
Yeah.
take a little bit more time
there's-
in the morning.
Yeah, there's definitely philosophy, but then you finish your statement first.
And I'm like super just, I'll address it as it comes. I'll think of a plan as I need to, and I'll address the big, the big
Yeah.
issues, being late or something like that. But yeah, I get a rough idea. But
Yeah, well, I've joked about with a couple people now. I don't know if it was with you or not. With like our children as they get older, like we have one daughter now, but it's like we plan to have more.
Yeah.
It's like if I have a free spirit child, somebody to just go with the wind, do whatever they want. I'm like, I want them to know how to budget, and I want them to be able to be on time.
yep.
And if they have those two things, the rest will kind of sort itself out. Like they'll be
That's
okay. Like they're not going to get themselves in ridiculous debt, and they're not going to lose out on opportunities if
Yeah.
they do those two things.
Yeah.
But if they go and just choose to go out like and with friends, and like my sister is kind of more on that side, and she's gone on in the last 2 or 3 years, she's gone on multiple like multi-day road trips with friends across the country. Like
Wow.
just a couple of them like literally like, hey, next week we're going to Colorado kind of thing.
From the East Coast.
Yeah,
Not-
like,
not
from
from
Missouri,
Wyoming.
so it's a little
Okay,
closer,
Missouri, okay.
but not much closer.
Yeah.
Like it's still like a 16-hour drive. Like so,
Yeah.
it's like, but like the week
a whim.
before, deciding to go like
wild.
out like multi-day road trip away, and I'm like, if they do that, they're fine. Like that's going to be good if you
Yeah.
can know that you can afford it and that you can not lose out on opportunities.
That's true.
But
Yeah.
otherwise, it's like be free to do what you want. And
Yeah.
some people they like feel like stuck by having all of those plans around them. It sounds like your wife is kind of like that a little bit.
I think she likes to have the
Or
plan.
yeah, she's the one that
I'm
has
the opposite. Yeah, I
yeah.
like that.
So
I'm
you
like
feel
that.
like confined.
Right.
when you
yeah.
have-
I'm like,
when
I
you're
don't
like-
want to be told what to do. I don't want to
Yeah.
just be,
Versus me,
slave to a
I'm like,
schedule.
I don't have to worry about it because it's all planned out.
Right. Yeah.
Like
That's fair.
the
That's
stress is gone because I know what's happening next.
different. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
So that's like the two perspectives, and a lot of that is just personality.
Yeah.
So with coming back to like the risk assessment side of things, is you're like, we'll just figure it out.
Right. Right.
And the impact of that wasn't too low. But here's the other impact of it that we didn't talk about yet is like, what stress is it putting on you and your wife and your relationship and how you guys interact with each other? Hopefully I'm okay to bring this up, but like with the rafting, the like float trip, like we went on a few weeks ago, where it's like finding parking was kind of hard and it got pretty stressful for you guys.
Pretty stressful.
And it's just
Yep.
parking. Shouldn't
Right.
matter that much. But you guys almost went home. Like you talked
was
about it like
stressful.
you were about to go home because of the parking.
Yeah, it was hot. Yeah, it was a heated moment there.
Yeah, and so like relational stress is also an impact to consider.
It's a similar situation with the train.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, it was, man, oof.
Yeah, so so your impact isn't just physical.
Right.
It's also relational and the situations and the people that you're around. So you could be like, hey, I don't think this is actually going to be that big of a deal if we're late, but I know it's going to stress my wife out a lot. So I'm going to put time into this. That's part of your impact,
Part of the impact,
measurement, where it's like it takes it from a low impact to at least a moderate impact.
Gotcha.
Kind of thing.
Because it's other factors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you want to like really consider impact, you have to look at all of the factors. And
Yeah.
like you could list them off, but I think like most people, if they spend a little bit of time thinking about it, where it's like you have the physical factors, like the risk to life and limb.
Yeah.
Like that's a real one. Like the whole idea as far as getting like not exploring parts of cities that you don't know are safe or not, because that could be actually dangerous.
Yeah.
Depending
Yeah,
on
rough part of town. Yep.
like where in the country you are and like what part of the city you are. And you as a non-resident, somebody that doesn't live there, wouldn't know until it's too late if that were to happen. Or you didn't know and you got lucky and nothing happened.
Yeah.
That's always the hopeful possibility.
Middle of the day versus, late at night.
Yeah.
Different
So like
times.
there's a lot of factors to stuff as far as like risk to body, stress levels, like long-term impact, like losing a job.
Yeah.
Like that's something that like if you look at numbers wise, it's like I would have to look up the numbers. So I don't want to pull something complete, but it's like losing a job is not an uncommon thing in our country.
No, yeah.
Like I would say like sure, maybe not
fair.
the majority of people lose a job,
Yeah.
but enough of them lose a job that people talk about it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And so based on that, it's at least a moderate to even a possibly high likelihood that you'll lose a job, but at very least a moderate. And what's the impact of that?
Yeah.
Like it's significant.
Right.
Like I think there was
Your
a
family
stat
depends
recently
on you.
that's like something like 75% of people in America live paycheck to paycheck.
Oh man. Yeah.
And so it's like if somebody in that group of people loses their job, they don't have food the next month or they can't pay rent.
Right.
So the impact now is extremely high for something that is a relatively reasonable possibility.
Yeah, it's just an endless cycle because then you go into debt, you take out a loan, you get interest charges on a credit card or something like that, and it just keeps on going.
And that's why it's like I mentioned in the first podcast a little bit the idea of like financial preparedness and where it's like this idea as far as like having an emergency fund and like people saying you should have 3 to 6 months, which is like given the 75+% people that live paycheck to paycheck, most people don't actually live by that advice or don't know how. I think that's a valid thing. Like they haven't been taught or shown how.
Yeah.
But like that's a like pretty reasonable thing to be like, this could happen to me with a very high impact.
Right.
And so it's like, so what are you doing to like help make that impact lower?
Right.
Or
That's where emergency savings comes in, or you know,
well,
second
and
job.
like there's also a side of things as far as like with your job, like what are you doing to make yourself invaluable at work so you're less likely to lose your job?
Right.
Like, are you working hard
Yeah.
or are you just getting by?
You're firing off some saucy emails, you know, some spicy emails to your bosses.
Are you stirring up trouble?
Right.
And because there's also like
Pleasant to work with.
yeah, because and that's where it's like,
Yeah, that's
are
a good
you
point.
somebody that your boss would want to keep on staff? If like there's like a situation at work where they have to let somebody go, are you the person that they would let go?
Right.
Or are you the person to be like, no, we can't lose this person?
And even if you're not like the most skilled, as long as you present yourself as being pleasant to work with and willing to learn.
Yeah, people
I think
skills.
that's a lot of the soft skills. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that
And
goes
so-
a lot longer.
So that kind of I think starts bringing into this broader area of like thinking about like how do you look at life and many different things that can happen that you're like, okay, using this like risk versus reward kind of scale, but more in the likelihood versus impact. What's the risk of it happening, likelihood of it happening? What's the consequence reward or the impact of that thing happening? And then actually looking at life and like, what am I doing to like make sure I'm going to be okay if that thing happens?
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about that likelihood impact chart.
Yeah, so there's like a
chart for
graph, a way of thinking about it is kind of like if you just have your standard XY graph, and on your X side is your likelihood,
Yeah.
and on your Y side is your impact. The further things are up and to the right, the more you should pay attention to them.
Right.
And
so if
so-
it's likely and high impact.
Yeah, if it's likely and high impact, you're like, I need to do something about this.
Okay. All
So
right.
that's where I would say, like with the job loss thing, it's moderate and high impact. You should probably at least think about it.
Think about it.
And I
Right.
would say you
Yeah, that's a
should
good point.
probably like take minimal steps. Like maybe you don't like people like that follow like Dave Ramsey's model.
Yeah.
Like he would be like, he's a person that would say it's not likely, but it's ultimate impact.
Yeah.
And so you should put all of your efforts towards it.
Right.
Like he takes it to that
He's
extreme.
very adamant. Yeah.
And there's other principles behind that it's not just the risk of losing a job.
Right.
But like it's not only that, but I think it's like he takes it to that like you should go all the way out on being as prepared as possible financially as you can be. Because there is a reality, like finances impact a significant portion of your life.
Oh, for sure.
Like
Yeah.
it's not something that is just meaningless.
Right. A lot of life depends on having some income, having some finance.
But I think that brings up a good thing that we talked about a little while ago of like people perceive impact differently.
Right.
Like it's
Right.
like some of it's subjective.
Right. Like if yeah. So like I'm thinking of a house built in a floodplain. So
Yeah,
your
yeah.
high likelihood, high impact, that's pretty bad. Your
Yeah.
house but people might consider that worth it because they have beachfront property
Yeah.
or something like that. So I would not like that personally because I would be too afraid of flooding or something like that.
But
So-
like in that situation, do you have good home insurance?
right.
Do you have a good place to go if it is going to flood?
Good
Do
backup
you
plan, yeah.
have like safety measures in place to make sure that you and your family are going to be safe in the case that it does flood, like,
Right.
and that does happen? So that's where it's like you can live in that situation and still be aware of the risk and aware of like the impact,
Right. Instead of a plan.
and still like be happy and not stressed out by living in that situation.
Right. Right.
Like other areas where it's like the ideas of like a house fire, like house fires are like, I think they used to be a lot more common.
Okay.
I don't hear about them as much, but like I would say in in like the late 1800s, early 1900s,
Before all the codes.
before code, but I was
Yeah.
thinking more so just the impact of a house fire was like drastic.
Oh yeah.
Like as far as like, I forget what year it was, but the Chicago fire, where it's
Yeah.
like half the city or whatever, however much,
Just
significant portion of the city burnt down because
Right.
of one house fire that started.
Yeah.
Now we have a lot better like systems in place across our country at least, and I think most of the world has better systems with fire management where it's like you're not as likely to have like a whole like city be destroyed by it, but it's like you could lose everything that you own.
Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
impact is still high. And it's like all it takes is one kid messing with fire in a closet.
Yeah.
It takes
Playing with matches.
a candle getting tipped over,
Yeah.
or like something like a stove being left on. Like it's simple things that
Curling
we
iron.
interact with every day. Like my wife for a while went around and unplugged every appliance in our house whenever we leave for any more than a day or so,
We just did that on our trip.
because she was just like worried about
in
like things
case.
spontaneously catching on fire. And it's
Yeah.
like that's not likely, but
Right.
if it happened, it's serious.
Right.
And so I'm like, I didn't make a big deal about it. And I was like, that's kind of funny, but
Yeah.
it's most likely going to be fine, but it doesn't hurt anything to do that. So go for
Right.
it.
Yeah. Just have to reset the clocks on the microwave. You know,
Yeah.
That's all you gotta do.
And so there's these things to consider like with risk assessments. And it's like, and then you get into like, okay, we all went through COVID and we all know about like the toilet paper shortage of 2020.
Right.
As far as like everybody's like we went to CVS for toilet paper. Who goes to
Yeah.
CVS for toilet paper? We did.
Right.
Because we couldn't find it anywhere else.
Yeah.
And like we were fine. Like we were able to go to CVS, and sure we probably paid like $10 for 6 rolls. And it's
Right.
like, okay, this is a bit expensive, but that's fine. And so it wasn't like life or death, but you apply that to other there's a stat in like some communities where it's like if trucking shuts down, like there's a big trucker strike in Canada for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know what the impact of that was economically, but say like trucking shuts down. That's how all of our food is transported. That's how all like everything is in the continental U.S. It's not at a port is reliant on trucks.
Right.
And so it's like if that shuts down for even like 3 days, it's like most grocery stores only keep like 2 to 3 days of supplies on hand.
Dang.
And so it's like 3 days of no supplies coming in, you're out of food. And then also if it like blows up, then you have panic buying like we did see with toilet paper.
Yep. Yep.
And other things. But like, so it's like, so if you add on, okay, this is a national thing that people are aware of and trucks are down, you're really like, stores are going to be empty really quick.
Right.
And so is the likelihood of that very high? Probably not, but we saw it happen in some situations. And like, there was, and also like we're in a unique spot being in the Baltimore DC area.
Yeah. Oh man.
Where there are
a
certain
bubble.
things that are like worse, but there's a lot of things that are better.
Yeah.
And one of those things I've noticed, like when you look at I did some research on this a while back, but when you look at like the housing crisis of 2008, this area like did a little dip
Right.
where everywhere else in the U.S. crashed
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just like
crashed.
died. And it's
Yeah.
because there's so much like of a like internal centralized economy here that it's like it was still valuable and worth it to live in this area during that time. And so house prices didn't crash and destroy because it was still like a high value place to live.
Right.
And so like we're shielded from some of those things. So it's like I had friends that lived in like rural Michigan and they're like, we don't have beef in our stores.
Yeah.
Like as far as we don't have chicken this week.
No meat.
Like, and even in like Virginia where I lived for a period of time, there was a couple times I went to the store and they're like, buy 1 pack of chicken only, like a limit on how
wow.
much chicken you could get kind of
Dang.
thing.
It's a shortage.
And so it's like, and so those are things that like happened. And so it's like, okay, well, what do you do? Most likely,
Yeah.
in most situations, the stores are going to restock. It's going to be fine. You're going to get there. And that's how it basically turned out in 2020.
Right.
Like, I don't know of anybody and I don't know of any stories of people that like died or had like didn't eat for multiple days because of food shortages as a result of COVID. Like, I don't think
yet.
that happened. So
I don't know of you.
like there might be some people that are touting that, but it's like we would have heard something
Right.
if that was happening. Like there's no reason to hide that so much.
Right.
Maybe there is a reason, but it's like without getting into too much, it's like
Right.
I have enough people that I know in a lot of different parts of the country. It's like that probably would have come up.
You just have to eat different things.
Yeah.
Like that's all it was. Yeah.
And so, but what if it got a little bit more serious?
Mm-hmm.
What if it was like, oh no, we're shutting down grocery stores?
Yeah.
What if it was like you actually aren't allowed to leave your house?
Mm-hmm.
And there are some political and like more philosophical reasons against that and like thoughts process behind that. But even just from a practical stance, as far as like, what do you do if you can't go to the store for a week?
Right.
Like I know of multiple people who it's like their shopping routine is to go like twice or 2 or 3 times a week. Tara and I average on like once a month.
Oh, wow.
Like we try to do that. Now we go more than that, sure. But it's like, so for fresh foods and like vegetables, but it's like we try to do one big Costco trip a month.
Nice. Yeah.
And we get all of our like meat, all of our stuff. And we're like good for basically the month.
Sweet.
For food. And so it's like so basically it's based on the time of the month. If there was to be a food shortage for a couple weeks, we'd be fine, or we'd be like, oh, we need more.
Yeah. You need to get a couple more things.
Yeah. But it's like, so, but what if it doesn't come back after a month? And I bring this up not to enter into a paranoid or crazy thing, but more so just be like in Ukraine right now, there are people that are like without electricity, without plumbing, without these things that we would in the US almost consider essential, if not like at the very least, very beneficial and very convenient, almost essential. And there are people that like had that and don't have it now. And it's like, and their lives are changed. And sure, you could make an argument that it's like, well, they just live in a part of the world where that's more likely. But to say that that could never happen here,
right,
I would say is if not borderline, is foolish.
Yeah.
And that's not saying that I'm like, oh, it's going to happen.
Right.
Everybody know, get ready. The collapse is coming.
Right.
Like I'm not that person, but I do like to take a serious look at possibilities.
Even if it's a 0.0001%, chance of happening, it's still not never.
Yeah.
Never going to happen,
And so from that, then what steps do you take? I do want to address the potential elephant in the room of like, there are people that takes this to an extreme. Some people, I would say in a hobby-like reasonable way, where they're just like, I really like this, so I put all my money towards it.
Right.
Some people in a, I'm consumed by this and this is unhealthy, but in the prepper community,
right,
where it's like, they take this and they're like, the end of the world is coming, be ready.
Right.
Like I saw a YouTube video of a guy who I generally like most of his stuff, but he's like 11 things to buy before the end of the world kind of thing. And I was like, okay, we're not quite there. Like that's like, even if we're like maybe headed in that direction, like that's not tomorrow.
Still a mile away. Yeah.
And sure, are things getting more expensive? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like buy it while it's cheaper. Sure, you could say that.
Okay. Yeah. I think
but
it's
it's like
everything though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea of like, some people take it to an unhealthy extreme. But I think like others live in a spot of being like, I'm aware of possible things in the world. I'm aware that like there are multiple countries in the world that are at war and the US is involved with most of them in some way or another. And that impact could spill over and not just impact those countries, but our country as well.
Right. So basically what you're saying is it's all subjective, right? Like, so like I could see it as, okay, maybe I don't need to put as much value on that impact happening. And maybe I need to be aware of it, but maybe I don't need to actually have as much preparation for that because I don't think the impact is high, or I don't think the likelihood is as high as someone else. But whereas you could say, oh, no, I think it's going to happen tomorrow. The end of the world is going to happen within our lifetime, or, within the next 10 years, America's going to be invaded. You could have that thought. And that's a little bit subjective, using some data and analysis to maybe give you an opinion. But
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
I would say our response is definitely subjective. Like we get to choose our own response.
Okay.
But like,
but even like a likelihood, like, because you could have two different people. Oh, it's going to happen tomorrow.
It's true. Yeah.
U.S. is going to be economic collapse. Is going to happen within 5 years, and then you have other people saying, "Oh, U.S. is too much the center of the world. We're going to be set for 20, 30 years." Two very good.
Which I want to just point out, even
analysts.
with that, both of those are in our lifetime. So
yeah,
just keep that in mind. I'd rather have 20 years to get ready for that than 5, but both are possible.
Yeah.
And as you can see, I work really hard to not get consumed and overwhelmed by it, but I lean on I want to prepare as if it's going to happen, because if it does happen, then I'm ready. If it doesn't happen, then I just have some extra stuff in my basement.
That's fair. Yeah.
Like as far as I use I buy freeze-dried foods in bulk occasionally. Like I haven't done it in a while, but I did that to be like, hey, I have some food that I can just throw some water in with a camp stove, and I have meals. Yeah. I also go and use those for camping.
Yeah.
But I buy them in bulk initially, so I have them around the house, and then when I get a little bit low, I buy another bulk pack. Right. But I use those in my daily life. So I'm like, it's like just a little small way that I have some food that I can heat up if I need it, if we can't go to the store for a couple of weeks.
Right.
But I also use it.
and that preparation also addresses a couple other risks, right? Like
Yeah.
so you're prepared against if whatever reason the stores close for a week or two. You're prepared for that. You're prepared for a blizzard where you can't get out to the store, or like there's a I don't know, power outage where you can't cook food. You just need hot water. You have hot water. You can boil it maybe over an open fire. So
Yeah.
that kind of countermeasure, I guess is the right word. Countermeasure kind of prepares you against certain different risks.
Yeah. And
right?
that's where it's like a thing that I think is good to know is like FEMA,
Yeah.
which is like the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Sounds right.
That's at least
Sounds
matches
right.
with the acronym.
Yeah.
But they even recommend, they changed their verbiage. They've changed it 3 times now that I'm aware of. The
Okay.
first, like years ago, it was everybody should have 3 days of food and water.
Right. I remember that one. Yeah.
Then they changed it to everybody should have 2 weeks of food and water.
That's right. That's recent.
In the last 3 years, because
Oh.
I can't remember the last time I checked it
Even more.
when they saw this, but in the last 3 years, they've changed it to everybody should have several days worth of food and water, which I like less than 2 weeks.
2 weeks is
Because 2 weeks,
definitive.
2 weeks is like, oh, having much.
Quantitative.
Several days is like, what are you?
Right.
Should it be
7?
more?
10?
Should it be more than 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks? Like,
Right.
are we taking a step
Is 2
towards
weeks too much? Is it 2
more
weeks too
or towards less?
Right.
But it says now it just says everybody should have several days. So interpret that as how you will. But it's like,
Subjective, I guess, again.
yeah, so there is a subjective element to it. But I do think that there's a side of things where there's a lack of awareness that some people willingly step into and some people just don't know.
Right.
So some people choose to, I'm never going to think about these things. And some people are like, you know what? I have never been exposed to it. Like, I didn't know. I didn't even know that was a possibility.
Right. Right.
Like one example of like a small local thing that happened. When I lived in Alaska, there was a huge windstorm that knocked out power at a local grocery store for a couple days, but it was long enough that they had to throw out all of their meat.
Oh, shoot.
And this is in Alaska where everything is imported. So that grocery store didn't have meat for like 5 to 7 days.
Dang.
So it's like 5 to 7 days. That's not too long, but it's like if you're depending on like going to that store every day
Yeah.
to do
Even
that.
a week, if you do it once a week, and
Like,
it
as
just
far as,
happens
like-
to hit when it's your day.
So that's
Yeah.
like where it's like that thing happened. And I kind of say this to say, I think it is foolish to ignore possibilities. But I don't think that everybody, I think based on your like perception of the world, your analysis of the risks, and your view of like what resources do you have around you, it changes how you prepare for them.
Yeah.
And this is where I would call like the person that wants to live the well-prepared life. There's a reason why that was in the name because it involves some physical side thing. If you want to be well-prepared, that's doing above the bare minimum.
Yeah.
So to be
good.
well-prepared
Yeah. Well prepared. Okay.
is to take that next step of like, okay, so this is maybe not that likely, but the impact is really high. So I'm gonna just take a couple small steps towards that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and so, and like that idea of like, oh, like,
I'm thinking of an example like you lock your door at night. Okay,
Yeah.
that's the basics. What's another step? Maybe get an alarm system. Maybe get like I don't know, some kind of a guard dog or something. Like if you can go like gates and guards and
firearms and
guns,
self-defense
right.
classes and like
Right.
having the ability to like,
as much as you want to. Like
Yeah.
you go as far as you want to really to protect your home. Home defense kind of thing. So
yeah,
I guess it is like a level to be well prepared. You have to be a little bit more than just locking your door.
I would say, yeah.
You're right. A little bit more than just a day's worth of food or water. Maybe a
Yeah,
week.
a little bit more than
Maybe.
just what's in your pantry.
Right.
Like
right.
that you have, because I would say like going past that basic level is that you have food
Right.
in case, even if it is just a day or two,
Yeah.
but that you have food that you've said this is for if we need it and we can't go to the store.
Yeah.
Versus most people, they just have what's in their pantry. And
Right.
if their pantry is full, they're in a good spot. If it's not, then they're not.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
There's a phrase I've heard is like one is none, two is one. So
yeah,
it's like,
and that's very popular in like the survivalist
Okay,
like
gotcha.
preparedness world.
yeah.
But like what I kind of want to call people to on this podcast specifically is you should, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say this, like, I believe you should take that next step of being like, what are the risks? So
Yeah.
I like actually at one point made a document and listed out like possible risks that I see.
Oh, nice.
And then was like, went through with my wife and was like, okay, how likely is this? What's the impact if it happens? How likely is this? What's the impact if it happens? And then I like actually took that next step and made a plan as far as, okay, if this happens, here's where we're going. Here's what we have. Here's what we're doing. Here's the people that we're contacting. And I made like steps through that whole process for each of those things. So like I had like a flood where we
Yeah.
were low likelihood,
Yeah.
So I was like, but if it happens, we'll go to this place. We'll go to our friend's house. We'll bring food with us. This was in a period of time. I'm trying to remember like what was going on. This was right at the beginning of COVID. And like, I'm like, when like the first couple weeks, I was like, I'm buying respirators. I'm buying like, at that point I didn't have gas masks. But it's like I'm buying like full seal respirators. I'm buying I was researching and looking into like hazmat suits because I'm like, I don't know how bad this thing is.
Yeah.
It could be terrible. Like people could be dying on the streets. 2 weeks later, I'm like, wow, this is not that.
Not as crazy as I thought.
And so it's like, based on my lack of awareness of what the real threat was, I was like, this could be the worst possibility. And like my awareness and like a knowledge of the impact, like I thought it could be like very high likelihood, very high impact.
Right.
And so I was responding accordingly. And we had a plan as far as like, okay, so if this does take off, probably going to my dad's house in Arkansas. And we're like going across, and we're getting out of Maryland where it's like they're more likely to lock down borders than other places. And like, and getting to a place that's rural and getting to a place that's like, I know can be safe and we can grow food. And that's like, obviously that's worst case scenario, but it's like, I was thinking about that. And it's like, and I have friends that like, a lot of them are military background, but it's like, I have a couple of friends who like own hazmat suits because they're like, my dad lives in a place that's like kind of near a fallout area if there was like a nuclear attack from Russia, which is sadly not off the table. Again, I wouldn't say it's likely, but it's not impossible.
Right. I mean, that was the threat back when Ukraine was first getting invaded. Everybody was kind of, I remember having a couple of friends tell me like, oh my gosh, there's going to be, nuclear fallout. You got to be, be prepared for a nuclear attack near DC, near Baltimore, big city. So wasn't off the table.
And so looking at this, as far as there's the kind of two sides of this, two extremes you can go to. You can go the overwhelmed crazy prepper.
Right.
Where you're like, this is my whole life now. My whole life is to prepare for the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Or you can put your head in the sand. And I want to like live right somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Where I want to be aware of the problems and avoid putting my head in the sand, but I don't want them to consume me.
Yeah.
And that's where it comes back to this idea of resilience in general, I think, where resiliency is being able to like handle the problems that life throws at you without and like thrive in the midst of them. And obviously we're not thriving all the time, but there's this idea of like, if you are losing out on joy because you're worried about what could happen a year from now, like that's not healthy.
So maybe, I don't know, my mind works better in metaphors. So like you want to have that beachfront property and enjoy the beachfront property and not be freaking out about being in a floodplain.
Because how much are you going to enjoy it if every time you're there, or say you live there, you wake up in the morning, you're like, my house could get flooded.
Right. Every day.
Every
hour. Yeah.
Like if you're living like that, move.
Right.
Like don't live there.
That's the extreme.
And
right? That's the like the more, I guess, what'd you say, crazy, like extreme preppers or whatever.
And I want to qualify that, like not all preppers are crazy.
Right. Okay.
Like I said, there are some people that just think things are more likely than maybe I would.
Sure.
And I probably think things are more likely than you would. And you probably think things are more likely than other people would.
Sure. Yeah.
Like as far as this, like
there's a hierarchy.
There's like a spectrum as far as like how much we think like things are likely to happen.
Yeah. Spectrum.
And so there, I would say like you have the people at the crazy end of the spectrum where it's like the end of the world is coming tomorrow and I'm going to be ready for it no matter what. And I'm going to go into debt because of preparing for this thing.
Right. That's going to be all I think about day in, day out, like no life outside of that.
So
no
don't
enjoyment.
live there.
That's like, don't live in the beach house.
And there are people though, like there's a part of me, there's this a part of me inside of me that would be like, I would love to live like if that's the crazy 100. I live to live at 75%.
Yeah.
of like I'm ready for the worst. I have a rural property. I have like place like I have a small homestead.
Got a good plan.
Like I have a place I could go live.
Yeah.
Like there's a part of me that desires that security.
Right.
But I'm like I can't do that at the expense of life now.
Yeah.
You
just had a baby. You got to enjoy the time raising the baby.
So I can dream about that and be like, hey, maybe someday I'll own a property and I'll be able to go there and I'll be able to like have a small farm and I'll like be able to do that. And that's like kind of fun to think about with that. But it's like, I'm not going to like cut short on the things that are good now to do that. That doesn't mean I'm going to ignore threats and just be like, I'm only going to think about it when I can maybe do that in the future.
Yeah. That's the other side of it. Is like, that doesn't mean you're not going to be aware, hey, this is a beachfront. Hurricane season is going to be a high impact of flooding or damage to the house. You got to be a little bit prepared for that, So that's I guess that's the other end of the example.
Yes, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I feel like
Right.
we've went pretty in depth on this, but
Yeah.
kind of to sum it up is think about the things that could happen and kind of put them on a scale as far as how likely is it to happen and what's the impact if it does happen. And those things that sit at the high ends of both, very likely and high impact. And I would say like even sometimes that like if it hits the high end of either scale, you should at least think about it.
Yeah,
And the only ones that
that's
you really like just be like pass over if it's low likelihood, low impact. Like
Yeah.
those are the ones you don't really need to worry about. You probably won't even think about them.
Sure.
Like as far
Yeah.
as like you're gonna be like
It's
it's gonna be
everyday
like
stuff.
like I'm trying to even think of an example, and I'm like, you broke your thumb.
Yeah.
Like as far as like that could be high impact for some people, but
Yeah.
like but I'm like, I guess like it's even hard to think of something that's actually low likelihood and low impact.
I think the thing I could think about low impact and low likelihood.
Yeah,
That's a good question. I don't know.
yeah, because it's like we
Yeah.
don't think about those things. That's like you stub your
A
toe.
meteor hits I don't know, the ocean or
Yeah.
something like that's low impact, low likelihood. I don't know. Big.
Yeah, but I'm like,
Could
you
have
stub your
impact.
toe, like as
Yeah.
far as like, I'm like that's low impact, low
Right.
and high likelihood.
Yeah.
Kind
yeah.
of
Yeah.
thing.
Still high likelihood for clumsy individuals like myself.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but think about those things, and then I would say like to be that well prepared person, make a plan.
Yeah.
Like actually take the time to be like, what would I do in this situation? And if there are things that you need to do now to get ready for that, start thinking about that and take that as far as you can go without like letting it be something that consumes you.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. Like to be well prepared, you want to take it to the point where you are like, I'm taking this seriously, but it's not running my life.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that's the line. And
Give
it's
it
going to
some
be
weight.
different for different people.
Yeah.
But I would say like for the person that wants to be that well prepared, live that well prepared life,
Yeah.
like you're going to lean towards the heavier side than the lighter side.
You're going to think about it a little bit more. Yeah.
Um,
That's a good point.
because that's what
A little bit of thought.
this is about as far as being ready for all the things that life can throw at you. And so that might mean having 6 months worth of food stocked up in your basement.
Right.
But
Or
not
at least 2
necessarily.
days. Maybe 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And that's your emergency
I would
stash.
say lean
Don't
towards
touch
that 2 weeks. That's
Right.
my recommendation if I'm going to throw it out there. Lean towards 2
Yeah.
weeks because like worst case, you have 2 weeks of food.
it. Right.
And but
Still can
like
use it.
in the best case, well, I would say worst case, you have to use 2 weeks of food that you stored up and you can't go to the
Before it
stores.
goes expired.
Best case, you just have extra.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
Worst case, you have to use it.
Yeah.
There's an emergency that hits and you need to use it. Yeah.
But yeah, so like if
That's
for a brief recommendation as far as like work towards having 2 weeks of food, which is not that hard. Like not that hard to get 2 weeks of food, especially it's like
Yeah.
if you have a freezer. Like one of the things that I want to start working on in my house soon, it's expensive though, is I want to get some type of generator set up because we live on a well. And so if I can keep a fridge freezer going and my well going, I have water and like frozen foods.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm good.
Growing up, we had one in West Virginia. His power went out a lot out in the sticks. So,
Yeah. So generators are like pretty normal.
yeah.
And that's a form of being prepared.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's good.
Well, Kyle, thanks for your input.
Yeah.
I think this is
Thank
really
you.
good, and hopefully it's helpful. If you're like maybe haven't thought about this, hopefully it just makes you think about it. And if you have thought about it but don't know what to do, hopefully that like assessment tool will help you in figuring out, okay, what are the next steps? And then for planning on it, like there are lots of people that make prepping YouTube videos. And what I would say is if you're interested about a topic, go search it and take what they say and don't be like, they're going to say it like it is the most important thing in the world.
Right.
Don't listen to that part.
Yeah.
What you need to listen to is what steps did they take and what things of those steps should you think about doing or
Yeah.
not.
They probably went 1,000 steps in that direction. Maybe you take 2 or 3, maybe a couple hundred,
Yeah.
figure out what's best for you. Yeah.
And so it's like there are lots of resources out there. If there's a specific thing you're like, hey, you know what? I live in a like low floodplain. Like, what should I do? Look that up. Do some research onto it and figure out a plan of like what should I do as far as the next steps go.
Right. Right.
But yeah, one more step towards living that well-prepared life. Because we want to lean into like forging resilience, and that means planning well.
Yeah.
And we grow as we learn new things, and then we also get to take responsibility for our lives as we prepare for what could happen. So thanks for joining us on this journey to well-prepared life.